Ladies and gentlemen, today I stand before you to shed light on a critical issue in global economics and diplomacy: why Trump's new trade war with India could backfire on America. A trade war between the United States and India carries significant economic costs that extend far beyond the political headlines or the rhetoric of winning at the negotiating table. When two large economies impose tariffs on each other's goods and services, the immediate effect is not just felt at government levels, it cascades down to ordinary farmers, small businesses, manufacturers, and ultimately consumers. In the case of America, taking a tough stance against India in trade may seem appealing to certain domestic audiences, but the hidden costs are likely to outweigh any short-term political gain. To begin with, India is one of the fastest growing economies in the world and a critical export market for the United States. From almonds and apples grown in California and Washington to soybeans produced in the Midwest, American agricultural producers have increasingly looked to India as a growing consumer base. Tariffs imposed by India in response to U.S. measures could mean American farmers lose vital market access, leaving them with surplus products and lower revenues. These losses are not just theoretical, they are real risks that translate into lower incomes for farming families, job cuts in rural communities, and economic stagnation in regions that rely heavily on agricultural exports. At a time when many farmers already face challenges from global competition, drought, and fluctuating commodity prices, the last thing they need is the added burden of a trade war. The manufacturing sector would also suffer. U.S. companies export high-value goods to India, such as aircraft, machinery, and medical equipment. These industries are often touted as the backbone of American innovation and high-skilled jobs. If India retaliates with tariffs or regulatory barriers, American companies could lose access to a market of over 1.4 billion people. That market is not just large in numbers, but also dynamic in terms of rising demand, particularly among India's growing middle class. If these consumers turn instead to European, Chinese, or domestic suppliers, American companies risk losing long-term footholds in a market that will define global growth in the decades ahead. Once such opportunities are lost, they are very difficult to regain, as competitors will step in to fill the void. Consumers in the United States, too, would feel the pinch. Trade wars are not a one-way street. When tariffs are imposed, the costs are typically passed down the supply chain, and eventually it is households that bear the higher prices. Products that use Indian inputs, whether textiles, pharmaceuticals, or IT services, could see cost increases. India is a key supplier of affordable generic medicines to the U.S., helping millions of Americans access healthcare at lower costs. Disruptions in this trade could drive prices upward, making healthcare more expensive for families and burdening an already stretched healthcare system. Small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, also stand to lose heavily. Many smaller American businesses rely on access to Indian markets or Indian suppliers to remain competitive. For example, tech startups in the U.S. often outsource parts of their operations to India to manage costs and scale efficiently. If tariffs and restrictions escalate, these smaller firms may not have the financial strength to absorb the additional costs. This puts them at risk of closure or stagnation, further reducing the dynamism of America's economy. Another layer of cost comes from uncertainty. Trade wars create volatility and unpredictability in global markets. Investors hesitate to commit capital when policies seem unstable or hostile, which can slow economic growth. For U.S. businesses operating in India or planning to expand there, uncertainty about tariffs, regulations, and retaliatory policies creates hesitation. This results in missed opportunities for expansion and innovation. Over time, the chilling effect of uncertainty can cost billions in lost investment and jobs. Furthermore, trade wars are not easily contained. They often spread into other areas of economic relations. What begins as tariffs on goods can quickly spiral into disputes over services, investment rules, or intellectual property rights. Given that services like IT, software, and business process outsourcing form a large part of U.S.-India economic ties, such escalation would further disrupt a vital area area of cooperation. Considering that services trade with India brings billions of dollars into the U.S. economy annually, even partial disruption could have significant consequences. The economic costs of a trade war with India are not hypothetical. They are real risks that threaten to weaken key sectors of the U.S. economy. Farmers, manufacturers, consumers, small businesses, and even healthcare providers could face severe challenges if economic relations between the two nations deteriorate. While political rhetoric may frame tariffs as tools of strength, the reality is that they often create more harm than good. For the United States, jeopardizing access to a growing and vital market like India is not a strategy that ensures prosperity, but one that risks economic self-sabotage. The relationship between the United States and India has long been described as a strategic partnership, one that extends beyond mere trade numbers and into the realms of security, diplomacy, and global influence. A trade war threatens to undermine this delicate yet vital bond, creating consequences that ripple far beyond the realm of economics. When considering how critical India is to America's broader interests in Asia and the world, it becomes clear that entering into a trade conflict is not just unwise but potentially damaging to long-term U.S. goals. At a geopolitical level, India is seen as a cornerstone of stability in the Indo-Pacific region. The Indo-Pacific has become one of the most contested and strategically important regions in the world, particularly due to the rise of China as both an economic powerhouse and an assertive military power. The United States has invested heavily in strengthening alliances and partnership throughout the region as a way to balance China's growing influence. In this strategy, India plays an indispensable role. It shares a border with China, has its own set of disputes with Beijing, and has historically been cautious of Chinese expansionism. For Washington, having India as a partner provides not just an ally in trade, but a counterweight in terms of military cooperation, regional influence, and democratic solidarity. A trade war could fracture this trust if India feels cornered or unfairly targeted by U.S. tariffs and trade restrictions. It could begin to reassess its alignment. Nations act in their own interests, and India has other options on the global stage. It could strengthen its economic and military ties with Russia, deepen its engagement with China despite existing tensions, or expand partnerships with regional organizations like ASEAN. For the United States, losing India's cooperation would mean losing a major pillar in the balance of power against China in Asia. The result would weaken America's ability to shape the regional order, giving greater room for rival powers to assert themselves. Another element to consider is the shared democratic values between the U.S. and India. Both nations take pride in being large, diverse democracies, and this forms a foundation for diplomatic cooperation. Unlike authoritarian systems, democracies rely on mutual trust, respect, and a sense of fairness in dealing with each other. A trade war, however, undermines these values by creating friction where there should be cooperation. It sends a signal that the U.S. is willing to disregard the importance of partnership when domestic politics demand a show of toughness. Such a perception risks eroding the moral authority of the United States in advocating for democratic unity on the global stage. Military and security ties are another critical part of the U.S.-India strategic partnership. The two countries conduct joint military exercises, share intelligence, and cooperate in counter-terrorism efforts. They are also members of frameworks like the Quad, which includes Japan and Australia, aimed at promoting a free and open Indo-Pacific. While these ties may seem separate from economic disputes, the reality is that trust in one area affects cooperation in others. If India perceives U.S. trade actions as hostile, it may hesitate to fully align with Washington on sensitive security matters. This hesitation could manifest in reduced military cooperation or less enthusiasm for joint strategic initiatives, weakening the overall effectiveness of regional partnerships. Energy security is another dimension of the strategic partnership. India has emerged as a significant buyer of U.S. energy exports, including liquefied natural gas and crude oil. These exports not only help reduce America's trade deficit, but also strengthen energy ties that make both nations less dependent on unstable suppliers. However, if trade tensions escalate. India could diversify away from U.S. energy, turning instead to alternative suppliers like Russia, Iran, or Middle Eastern countries. Such a shift would reduce American leverage and economic benefit while strengthening competitors. A trade war also risks damaging people-to-people ties, which are a cornerstone of U.S.-India relations. Millions of Indian students, professionals, and entrepreneurs contribute to the U.S. economy and cultural landscape. At the same time, American businesses benefit from talent and collaboration with India's growing workforce. If the relationship sours due to economic disputes, these human connections may weaken. Reduced educational exchanges, visa restrictions, or public mistrust could chip away at the goodwill that has taken decades to build. The broader cost is that the United States risks pushing away one of its most natural partners in a world increasingly defined by strategic rivalries. India is not just another country on the global map. It is a rising power with the potential to shape the future of international politics. Maintaining a strong partnership with India strengthens America's hand, not only in Asia but also globally, as both nations collaborate on issues ranging from climate change to technological innovation. Sacrificing this partnership for the sake of tariffs or short-term trade disputes is short-sighted and risks long-term setbacks that no economic win could compensate for. The strategic partnership between the U.S. and India is too important to be jeopardized by a trade war. Economic disputes can and should be managed through negotiation and cooperation rather than confrontation. If America undermines its relationship with India, it risks weakening its geopolitical position, losing a vital ally in the Indo-Pacific, and damaging the very democratic values it claims to uphold. The costs of a trade war, therefore, are not just economic, they are strategic, and they could reverberate for decades. India represents one of the most promising and dynamic markets in the world today, and this makes its relationship with the United States especially important. With a population of over 1.4 billion people, India is not only the world's largest democracy, but also one of the fastest growing major economies. For American businesses, India's expanding middle class and increasing purchasing power present immense opportunities. However, a trade war between the United States and India could undermine access to this growing market, costing American industries both immediate profits and long-term strategic positioning. When examining the potential consequences, it becomes clear that the economic value of India's growing market is too significant to risk in pursuit of short-term political gains through tariffs. At the heart of India's appeal as a market is its expanding middle class. Millions of Indians are moving from lower income brackets into middle and upper income categories, creating unprecedented demand for goods and services. This demographic shift is reshaping consumer behavior in India, with families seeking better quality products, healthier food options, advanced technologies, and global brands. For American companies, this means a wide range of export opportunities, from agricultural products and high-end machinery to luxury goods, automobiles, and medical equipment. U.S. businesses that tap into this rising consumer base stand to benefit for decades to come. As India's consumption continues to grow in both volume and sophistication, a trade war, however, risks alienating this market by creating barriers to entry, encouraging Indian consumers to turn to European, Chinese, or domestic alternatives instead of American products. Agriculture provides a clear example of the stakes involved. India is a major buyer of American almonds, apples, soybeans, and other agricultural goods. The demand for high-quality, nutritious food has surged as income levels rise and dietary habits shift. However, India has not hesitated to impose retaliatory tariffs in response to U.S. trade actions in the past. For American farmers who already struggle with price volatility and global competition, losing access to India's vast consumer base would be a serious blow. Other countries are eager to fill this gap, and once Indian consumers develop loyalties to new suppliers, regaining lost ground would be extremely difficult. Manufacturing and technology exports are also tied closely to India's growth story. American companies supply aircraft, defense equipment, medical devices, and advanced technologies to India. These industries not only bring profits, but also sustain thousands of high-skilled jobs in the United States. As India modernizes its its infrastructure and invests in healthcare, defense, and education, the demand for such products is set to rise even further. A trade war, however, could push India to source these needs from alternative partners such as Russia, France, or China. In doing so, the United States would lose not just immediate sales, but also long-term contracts, partnerships, and trust, which are central to sustaining business relationships in international markets. The service sector is another area of opportunity that could be jeopardized. India's economy is becoming increasingly digital with a booming technology ecosystem, rapid adoption of mobile internet, and a thriving startup culture. American companies, particularly in Silicon Valley, have already invested heavily in India, tapping into its tech-savvy population and innovation potential. U.S. platforms like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and Apple have found strong footholds in India, where demand for digital services is growing exponentially. A trade war could introduce new barriers, regulatory hurdles, or retaliatory actions against U.S. firms, making it harder for them to compete effectively with European and Asian companies eager to capture market share. The United States risks being edged out of a digital economy that will define future global competition. Pharmaceuticals and healthcare are further examples of India's growing importance as a market. With a population that demands affordable healthcare and rising middle-class interest in advanced treatments, India represents a massive opportunity for U.S. pharmaceutical and medical device companies. At the same time, India is also a key supplier of affordable generic medicines to the U.S. market, making the relationship mutually beneficial. Trade friction risks disrupting this exchange, ultimately harming patients and consumers on both sides. The broader implication is that India's market is not just large in scale, but also young in character, with a median age of under 30. India's workforce and consumer base will continue to grow and evolve for decades, while many other economies face aging populations. For the U.S., aligning with India's long-term growth is a way to secure sustained economic engagement far into the future. However, by entering into a trade war, the U.S. risks losing trust and goodwill, making it harder for American companies to establish or expand their presence in India. Competitors will not hesitate to step in, and once those business relationships are established, the U.S. may find it difficult to regain lost ground. India's growing market represents not only immediate economic opportunities, but also long-term strategic value. From agriculture to technology, manufacturing to healthcare, U.S. industries stand to benefit enormously from deeper engagement with India's expanding economy. A trade war jeopardizes these opportunities, creating openings for competitors while alienating a country that will play a central role in global growth throughout the 21st century. Sacrificing access to such a promising market for the sake of short-term trade disputes is a costly mistake, one that America can ill afford. The technological relationship between the United States and India is one of the most dynamic and mutually beneficial aspects of their partnership. Over the past 3 decades, a technology has become a bridge linking the two nations, with American companies relying on India's talent pool and India depending on American innovation and investment. From Silicon Valley to Bengaluru, the collaboration between these two countries has fueled global advances in software, IT services, artificial intelligence, and digital platforms. Yet, a trade war between the United States and India threatens to unravel this synergy, with consequences that could hinder innovation, weaken competitiveness, and reduce the benefits both nations enjoy from their shared technological ecosystem. One of the most visible dimensions of this relationship is the role of Indian talent in America's tech sector. Indian engineers, programmers, and scientists form a large part of the workforce in Silicon Valley and other U.S. technology hubs. They contribute to building software systems, driving innovation, and ensuring the competitiveness of American companies on the global stage. At the same time, U.S. companies outsource significant portions of their operations to India, where skilled labor and cost efficiency make it possible to scale projects quickly and effectively. This mutually beneficial relationship ensures that American companies remain leaders in global technology, while India benefits from jobs, investment, and exposure to cutting-edge innovation. A trade war that disrupts this collaboration, whether through tariffs, visa restrictions, or retaliatory measures would make it harder for companies to access talent and resources, ultimately slowing down innovation. Outsourcing and IT services are another major pillar of the U.S.-India technological connection. American businesses, ranging from start-ups to Fortune 500 corporations, have long relied on India's IT services sector to manage back-office operations, software development, and customer support. Companies like Infosys, Wipro, and TCS have become integral partners for U.S. firms, ensuring efficiency and cost effectiveness. This has allowed American companies to focus resources on innovation while maintaining competitiveness in a global market. If a trade war escalates and India retaliates with regulatory or trade barriers, these crucial service flows could be disrupted. Such disruptions would increase costs for U.S. companies, especially smaller ones that depend on outsourcing to remain viable. Beyond outsourcing, there is also the question of joint research and development. American universities, corporations, and research institutions often collaborate with Indian counterparts on technological innovations in areas like renewable energy, biotechnology, and space exploration. India's space program, for instance, has achieved significant milestones at a fraction of the cost of other nations, and U.S. companies stand to gain from this efficiency and expertise. Similarly, Indian researchers have partnered with U.S. institutions in developing vaccines and medical devices and clean energy solutions. A trade war, however, would strain these cooperative networks by creating distrust and bureaucratic obstacles, slowing progress on technologies that could benefit the entire world. Pharmaceuticals and healthcare technologies highlight another dimension of this collaboration. India has become a global hub for generic drug production, supplying affordable medicines not just to the U.S., but to countries around the world. At the same time, U.S. pharmaceutical companies look to India for research partnerships and access to clinical trials. If trade tensions escalate, supply chains for critical drugs and medical technologies could be disrupted, creating shortages and driving up healthcare costs in the United States. This is not just an economic concern, but a humanitarian one, as millions of patients depend on affordable medicines that rely on U.S.-India cooperation. The digital economy further underscores the importance of this collaboration. India is one of the fastest growing markets for internet users, digital payments, and mobile applications. American companies like Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Microsoft have invested billions of dollars in India, seeing it as a key driver of future growth. At the same time, Indian startups are rapidly expanding, attracting U.S. venture capital and forging partnerships with American tech giants. A trade war risks undermining this digital partnership by provoking regulatory backlash in India, limiting market access for U.S. companies, and creating mistrust among Indian consumers toward American brands. Losing ground in India's digital economy would mean losing a share of one of the world's most dynamic technology markets, something competitors like China and Europe would quickly exploit. Cybersecurity and data protection are also emerging areas where U.S.-India collaboration is critical. As digital economies grow, so do concerns over cyber attacks, data privacy, and digital governance. The U.S. and India have an opportunity to work together to set global standards and safeguard digital infrastructure, but a climate of trade conflict would erode trust, making it harder to cooperate on these sensitive issues. Without strong collaboration, both countries could become more vulnerable to external threats while missing the chance to lead in shaping the rules of the digital age. Technological collaboration between the U.S. and India is not just about economics. It is about shaping the future of global innovation. Both nations bring unique strengths, the U.S. with its advanced research and capital, and India with its vast talent pool and rapidly expanding digital market. Together, they can achieve breakthroughs that neither could accomplish alone. A trade war, however, risks weakening this partnership by introducing barriers, mistrust, and lost opportunities. For the U.S. Turning away from India in the technological sphere would not only reduce competitiveness, but also allow rivals like China to strengthen their position as leaders in global innovation. A technological collaboration is one of the most vital and promising aspects of the U.S.-India relationship. It benefits both nations economically, strengthens their global competitiveness, and drives innovations that impact the world at large. By pursuing a trade war, the United States would jeopardize this synergy, creating economic costs and undermining its own leadership in the technologies of the future. The smarter path is cooperation, not confrontation, because in the 21st century, technological progress will be the true measure of national strength. Global influence is not built solely on military power or economic strength. It is equally shaped by partnership, alliances, and the ability to project soft power across borders. For the United States, maintaining strong and trusted relationships with key partners has always been a pillar of its global leadership. India, as the world's largest democracy and one of the fastest growing major economies, plays an increasingly important role in this equation. A trade war with India, therefore, would not only damage economic ties, but also weaken America's influence on the global stage, ceding ground to rivals and undermining its credibility as a reliable partner. At the heart of U.S. global influence is its network of alliances and partnerships. The ability of the United States to shape international norms, policies, and institutions depends on the trust it builds with like-minded nations. India, with its size, geography, and democratic values, has emerged as a natural partner for America, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region. When the U.S. collaborates with India, it gains not only economic advantages, but also political legitimacy and strategic depth. If Washington chooses confrontation through tariffs and trade wars, it risks eroding this trust, signaling to the world that America prioritizes transactional disputes over long-term partnerships. Such a perception weakens U.S. leadership, making it harder to rally allies in times of need. The Indo-Pacific is a prime example of how U.S.-India cooperation strengthens American influence. As China's power grows, the region has become a critical arena of competition. The U.S. has consistently emphasized the importance of a free and open Indo-Pacific, a vision that depends heavily on Indian participation. India's geographic position, military strength, and shared interest in countering Chinese dominance make it indispensable to this strategy. If relations sour due to a trade war, India may become less inclined to align with U.S. objectives, thereby weakening the effectiveness of American policies in the region. Rivals like China would benefit, as they could exploit the rift by presenting themselves as more reliable economic partners to India. Global institutions are another arena where U.S.-India cooperation enhances American influence. Both nations play significant roles in forums such as the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, and the G20. When the U.S. and India work together, they amplify each other's voices, especially in advocating for democratic values, free trade, and global security. A trade conflict, however, could strain this cooperation, making it more difficult for the U.S. to push its agenda in these institutions. If India chooses to side with other emerging economies or align more closely with China and Russia on certain issues, American influence in global decision-making bodies would diminish. Soft power also plays a crucial role in sustaining U.S. global influence, and here too India is vital. Cultural, educational, and people-to-people exchanges between the U.S. and India have created a reservoir of goodwill. Millions of Indians study, work, or live in the United States, contributing to its economy while also serving as cultural ambassadors. American companies, universities, and values enjoy considerable prestige in India. A trade war risks eroding this goodwill, replacing admiration with resentment. Negative perceptions of U.S. policies could spread beyond India, affecting how other nations view American leadership. If Washington is seen as heavy-handed or insensitive in its dealings with partners, its ability to attract allies and build coalitions will suffer. Another dimension of global influence is economic leadership. By maintaining open and mutually beneficial trade relations, the United States projects itself as a champion of free markets and global integration. However, trade wars undermine this image, casting America instead as a protectionist power that disregards the interests of its partners. With India poised to become one of the world's largest economies in the coming decades, alienating it would create a credibility gap. Emerging economies around the world might question whether the U.S. is a dependable partner for sustainable growth. In contrast, China has actively positioned itself as a supporter of globalization despite its own protectionist practices. If India and other nations see China as a more consistent economic partner, U.S. influence in shaping the global economic order could erode significantly. Security cooperation is yet another area where influence is at stake. The U.S. has worked closely with India on counterterrorism, maritime security, and defense technology sharing. These initiatives not only strengthen bilateral ties, but also demonstrate America's role as a global security provider. If a trade war disrupts this cooperation, it would weaken U.S. influence in shaping security norms in South Asia and the Indo-Pacific. Moreover, countries in the region might question whether the U.S. can separate economic disputes from broader strategic commitments, reducing confidence in America's reliability as a partner. The long-term danger of a trade war is that it creates opportunities for competitors to expand their influence at America's expense. China, Russia, and even the European Union would likely seek to deepen their economic and political ties with India if the U.S. relationship falters. This would not only reduce America's market share in India, but also weaken its ability to shape policies in line with U.S. interests. Over time, such a shift could contribute to a multipolar world where America's voice carries less weight, making it harder to address challenges such as climate change, global health crisis, and technological governance. In summary, U.S. global influence depends not just on its economic or military might, but also on its ability to sustain trust and partnerships. India is central to this equation, offering both strategic alignment and a rapidly growing economy. A trade war would jeopardize these benefits, weakening America's position in global institutions, undermining its leadership in the Indo-Pacific, and eroding its image as a reliable partner. By pursuing confrontation instead of cooperation, the U.S. would not only harm its bilateral relationship with India, but also diminish its broader influence in the world. The better alternative to a trade war between the United States and India lies in cooperation, negotiation, and building frameworks that allow both countries to grow together rather than at each other's expense. Trade wars may appeal to political rhetoric by projecting toughness and defending domestic industries, but history has shown that they rarely create lasting benefits. Instead, they produce retaliation, uncertainty, and long-term harm to economic and strategic relationships. In the case of India, the smarter and more sustainable path for the USA is to strengthen cooperation, seek fair trade through dialogue, and create policies that ensure shared prosperity. This alternative not only avoids the costs of conflict, but also amplifies the benefits that come from working with one of the world's largest and fastest growing economies. One aspect of the better alternative is to pursue balanced trade agreements rather than unilateral tariffs. Negotiation allows the U.S. to address specific concerns, whether related to market access, intellectual property rights, or tariffs, while ensuring that India's interests are also considered. For example, instead of punishing Indian exports with tariffs, the U.S. could work to open up Indian markets further for American agricultural products, pharmaceuticals, and advanced machinery. At the same time, the U.S. could grant India more flexibility in areas where it faces developmental challenges. Such a give and take would create a win-win outcome, strengthening the bilateral relationship and generating goodwill on both sides. Another part of the cooperative alternative involves investing in joint ventures and partnerships. The U.S. and India already collaborate in fields like technology, defense, energy, and education. Expanding these areas of cooperation could generate significant economic gains. For instance, U.S. companies could partner with Indian firms to build renewable energy projects, helping both nations meet climate goals while creating jobs. In defense, co-production agreements could allow India to strengthen its military capabilities while creating export opportunities for American firms. In technology, deeper collaboration in areas like artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and space exploration would not only drive innovation but also solidify the two countries as global leaders in cutting-edge industries. Strengthening people to People ties is another crucial component of the better alternative. Millions of Indian professionals and students contribute to the U.S. economy, particularly in the technology sector. By making visa policies more flexible and encouraging educational exchanges, the U.S. can ensure that this pipeline of talent continues to benefit both nations. Such measures would also enhance goodwill, creating a stronger foundation for long-term cooperation. This human connection is a powerful asset that trade wars put at risk, but cooperative policies can strengthen it further. Economic cooperation also extends to global supply chains. The pandemic revealed the dangers of over-reliance on a single country, particularly China, for critical goods and technologies. India presents itself as a viable alternative hub for manufacturing and supply chain diversification. By working with India to strengthen its manufacturing base, the U.S. can reduce its dependence on China while creating new opportunities for American companies. This strategy aligns with broader U.S. goals of securing supply chains, protecting national security, and ensuring long-term economic resilience. A trade war would undermine this possibility, while cooperation would make it a reality. Diplomatic engagement is another part of the better alternative. The U.S. and India share common interests in promoting democracy, maintaining stability in the Indo-Pacific, and countering authoritarian influence. A cooperative trade relationship strengthens the broader diplomatic partnership, making it easier to work together on global challenges like climate change, terrorism, and health crises. By contrast, a trade war injects mistrust into the relationship, making diplomatic cooperation more difficult. Choosing cooperation reinforces America's image as a reliable partner, while confrontation risks alienating a country that is central to 21st century geopolitics. The better alternative also involves embracing competition in a constructive way. The U.S. and India will inevitably have disagreements over tariffs, subsidies, and market access, but instead of escalating these disagreements into a trade war, both sides can use structured dialogue, dispute resolution mechanisms, and multilateral platforms like the World Trade Organization to find solutions. By showing a willingness to work through disagreements, the U.S. demonstrates leadership and builds credibility in the eyes of the international community. This approach not only strengthens relations with India, but also reinforces America's role as a champion of fair and transparent global trade practices. The cooperative path recognizes that the U.S. and India are stronger together than apart. Both nations bring unique strengths to the table: America's advanced technology, capital, and innovation, and India's vast market, growing workforce, and geopolitical importance. By aligning these strengths through cooperation, both countries can achieve outcomes that would be impossible in isolation, whether it is developing new technologies, combating climate change, or shaping the global order. The U.S. and India have far more to gain as partners than as rivals. The better alternative to a trade war with India is a strategy built on cooperation, negotiation, and shared growth. By pursuing fair trade agreements, joint ventures, people-to-people connections, supply chain partnerships, and constructive diplomacy, the U.S. can strengthen its relationship with India while advancing its own economic and strategic interests. A trade war may create the illusion of toughness, but it weakens both nations in the long run. Cooperation, on the other hand, offers the promise of prosperity, stability, and global leadership. Choosing partnership over confrontation is not just the wiser choice, it is the only sustainable path forward.